Okay, so it's a great honor for me to introduce the first keynote speaker of the conference, Marie-Catherine de Marneffe. Marie received her PhD from Stanford University, and she's now associate professor at the Ohio State University. Marie is a world-leading researcher in computational linguistics with a remarkable breadth as well as depth in her contributions. Now, personally, I know her best for her work on Stanford dependencies, where she was the main developer, and for the continuation of that work within the framework of universal dependencies, which has had a fairly large impact in the area of tree banking and grammatical representations for NLP. Now, this is quite impressive in itself, but when you look at Marie's CV, you realize that this is just a side project for her. Her main research interest is to develop computational linguistic methods that capture what is conveyed by language beyond the literal meaning of words. And her contributions in this area includes many things, work on veridicality, on how semantic grounding can drive pragmatic inference, on recognizing textual inference, and on detecting contradictions. Now, a third line of research that I will just mention briefly is actually work on language acquisition, where she has, among other things, studied how children acquire verb morphology and how they choose between competing syntactic constructions like in the dative alternation. Now, Marie's topic for today is identification of speaker commitment for natural language understanding, which I think will include research for which she received a Best Paper Award at ACL this year, and which we're all eagerly looking forward to hearing more about. So please join me in welcoming Marie de Marneffe.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? All in the back? Thank you, Joachim, for the wonderful introduction. I hope the talk will be up to what you are expecting. And thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. So as Joachim said, my goal is to try to capture what we convey in language. And what do we take away when we talk, much more than only the literal meaning of strings. When we communicate, actually a lot of what we understand is not said explicitly, but rather infer. And what I wanted to show today is two case studies on what I call speaker commitment, or what linguists call speaker commitment. So what do I mean by this? So if I'm telling you, Turku is the northernmost city I've ever been to, you are going to take away, assuming you don't think I'm crazy, that this is probably true. Okay, so you are going to think that I'm committed to this, and Turku is probably the northernmost city Marie has ever been to. But if I was saying like Turku might be the northernmost city I've ever been to, then you are going to either think that I don't know my geography that well, or maybe I'm forgetting cities I'm traveling to. But in that sense, here you are not going to think that I'm fully committed to this fact. Okay, so I'm going to indicate this as maybe this is true, okay? So speaker commitment is, how certain a speaker is taken to be of the thing is asserting. So the first case study is work I did with some of my colleagues at Ohio State, Sandesh Swami, who was one of our master students, now is he has a job in industry, and Alan Ritter, who is teaching in computer science. And we wanted to try to use this notion of speaker commitment to improve prediction-making systems. So predicting the future is something that we all love to do, right? And this is something that we do all the time. So for example, here when in August 2013, Steve Ballmer announced that he was going to retire as the Microsoft CEO, then people had all sorts of prediction about who would replace him until February, when we knew then that Satya Nadella would be the one. And here an example from tweets that you could find out there. People saying like, my bet is that Satya Nadella is the new Microsoft CEO. I hope Ben Affleck is the new Microsoft CEO. And so there's been work in trying to look at what people are saying and can we predict what's going to actually happen, okay? So just to make sure we are all on the same page. So the task here is we have a given set of contenders for a given contest, and we try to predict who is going to win. Okay, and people have looked at this in the past. So, for instance, Best Actor, we know who the nominees are, and we try to predict who the winner is going to be. So maybe you remember who won in 2016, Best Actor? You're not following trivia? You don't remember, really? So it was Leonardo DiCaprio who won for his role in The Revenant. Okay, so prior work has tried to do that, and how did they try to make, prediction to forecast outcome? So some line of research was just using frequency. So using this idea of wisdom of crowd, if more people think that Leonardo is going to win, then probably Leonardo is going to win. Other works looked at, sentiment and classifying tweets as expressing positive or negative sentiment, and then do prediction based on that. And so what we were trying to do here, I think it's a simple idea, is to say, like, let's look at how certain people are of what they assert, and then only focus using also this notion of wisdom of crowd, but looking at if people are confident in what they are thinking, then maybe that's going to make better predictions. So what we want to do first is build a classifier that's going to identify tweets expressing commitment toward the outcome. So here we would want to be able to make a distinction between the three tweets here that I made up. 1917 will win Best Picture in 2020. If I say that, you are going to think that, Marie is confident that this is going to happen. Whereas if I say 1970 might have a shot at the Oscar in 2020, I'm not certain. You will probably not bet on this just hearing me say that. And then very importantly, and this is something that often we forget for information interaction or opinion mining, if I say that 1917 is good but not academy level good for the Oscar, then I'm asserting the negation of the event. And this is something that the field in bio-NLP has been looking at a lot, but mainstream NLP a little bit less so. So does that make sense? We are going to build a classifier that then can make a distinction, and here would only take the first tweet as expressing first commitment towards 1917 winning the Oscar. So what we do, standard, getting a corpus. So we extracted tweet. We chose a priori some events that I'm going to show on the next slide. And then we just look at Wikipedia, who are the contenders for those events, and then extracted tweets. So that's the beauty of the world we live in right now, that there is so much user data that are just, at our hands, right? And we can take so much data and then learn from it. We did it relatively simply, in a simple way. We would just take, the event here, Oscar, then one of the contender, only the keyword win, and then of course we took tweets that were coming out prior to knowing who the real winner was, right? Otherwise, that's cheating. So we gather data like this, and so here, I was telling you we can have tons of data. Quite a lot of data. So we look at elections. We look at some sports event, the second group there, and then some type of awards, the Oscar, Best Actor, Best Actress, Picture, Best Movie, right? Eurovision, and at least here in Europe, I don't have to explain to you what Eurovision is. And then the Ballon d'Or award, I also probably don't have to explain to you what that is. But so it's a soccer competition, who is the best soccer player of the year. And then we annotated some part of the data to train the classifier using Mechanical Turk. So we asked people so they would see, the tweet above here, Leonardo DiCaprio will win at the Oscar, best performance ever. If you are a participant in the study, you see this, and then we ask you, based on the tweet above, do you think does the author think that Leonardo is going to win? and then you annotate this on a 5-point scale. Definitely yes, probably yes, uncertain, probably no, definitely no. And to make sure that people were making this distinction between how confident you are of something happening and the desire of this happening, we also asked them for the same tweet, what was the desire of the author towards the event? Because sometimes you might think with certainty that something is going to happen, but this is not what you would want to happen. Okay, you can think of the, previous U.S. election, right? You can make sure that something, or sadly, is going to happen, but this is not what you want to happen, right? And so we wanted to make sure people were making this distinction. Does this make sense? So this is why we had those two annotations, but I will confess that right now we did nothing with this desire annotation, and we only looked at the speaker commitment annotation. So we had roughly 3,500 tweets annotated by at least 7 persons. That's also, I think, something that hopefully, now the field is realizing more and more. If we want to build a corpus of the reasoning that we do, you don't want to build a full classifier based on judgment of 2 persons that maybe you didn't really screen out well, you don't know whether they paid attention, but this is still a lot of what's going on in NLP, right? We build those huge data sets with 2 annotations, and then we are learning who knows what, okay? Then we used Maze to assign 1 gold label, so maybe we could have done this slightly better, but so far this is what we did. And then to make our life slightly easier, we actually pulled, the first 2, definitely yes, probably yes, as positive commitment, uncommitted, and then negative commitment. At the time, I guess 2 years ago, we just used a simple log linear model with standard features. So we know for a given tweet, we know who the target was. Here it was a tweet extracted asking for Oscar Leonardo win. And so Leonardo is the target. We know that Cranston wants one of the other nominees, so we will say is an opponent. We can do name entity recognition, and then we took standard features, context, word around the target and the opponent, the word between the target and the keyword, which is win in our cases, dependency path. Joachim told you that I've been doing a lot of dependencies, so of course I'm using dependencies. Negated word, keyword, is the keyword negated or not, following the dependency path in the sentence, what kind of punctuation do we have, and then distance between target and keyword, as well as potential opponent and the keyword. And so we learn on our 3,000 tweets there. And then we can do something relatively good. So here, looking at saying whether a tweet is positive commitment or not, we decided to use the threshold where we had a precision of 80% with a recall only of 44. But what we really wanted to have is we are pretty sure that when the classifier is saying positive commitment, the classifier is right. So at this point now we have a classifier which at 80% precision can classify a tweet as expressing firm commitment towards the outcome. Of course, it's never perfect, and so here are some error analysis. So that would be, a tweet, and we are asking here, is the author of the tweet committed to the fact of Nadal winning? Okay. So I will let you read the tweet, and then I will ask you to tell me whether you would say that this author is committed to Nadal winning or not. Does this make sense? Okay. So you probably read it by now. So is the author committed to Nadal winning? No, right? You are all shaking your head. So no, I use this little symbol. So the goal, our Turkers did a good job. It's negative, right? Agreeing with you, but the classifier messed up here and thought this was positive. This is actually pretty difficult, right? The hearts want Nadal to win, but the mind points to Djokovic winning. Another one, so hopefully tomorrow Federer will win and beat that Nadal guy. Is the author committed to Nadal winning? No, right? We don't know, right? He's hoping that Federer is going to win, but he's not committed to one or the other, right? So the goal would be uncommitted, but here again the classifier messed up. So the classifier is not, totally great, 80% prediction only, but this is what we had, and this is what we used, okay? And so now it's time to make prediction of who is going to win, and we did it in a relatively crude way, just using wisdom of the crowd, right? So we would just count, how many tweets do we have that the classifier thinks are expressing positive commitment towards the contender. Look at how many tweets we have that the classifier classify as expressing firm commitment towards the opponent, and then we count and divide, okay? So here were the numbers for Best Actress, and so I actually did the computation yesterday, and so you see that immediately, Kate Blanchett would be the one predicted to be the winner, and actually it turns out that she did, right? So in this combination of having this wisdom of the crowd plus, a classifier looking at a linguistic notion, we actually beat previous approach to that problem. So instead of it's just a small, difference in the approach, right? Instead of looking at just frequency, we look at tweets that express firm commitment towards the event, right? And if you can do this, even with a classifier that's not 100% correct, you do better. Does this make sense? So here it was like using this notion of linguistic commitment speaker commitment that linguists have been looking at for a long time to try to improve this downstream NLP task. But of course, speaker commitment comes in way other more complex things. And so in the second part of the talk, this is what I'm going to show you. So here we focused on, affirming something or the negation of an event or just hedging, okay, in the future. But we can look at a lot of other affirmations that are actually hidden in sentences, okay? So I'm going to give you a very quick crash course in semantics, okay, on the next slide. And hopefully show you that this is super pervasive in language, okay? So let's assume that I ask you, did Sarah, the CEO of Acme Inc., call this morning? There are actually two propositions that I'm uttering here. There is one that's a question, did Sarah call? But I'm actually also affirming that Sarah is the CEO of Acme Inc., right? And you would get that. Even if you don't know this Sarah, I'm asking you this, then you are going to immediately have this link doing. And again, assuming I'm not crazy, you're going to believe that Sarah is the CEO of Acme Inc. Yeah? So this is going to be a commitment of the speaker, that Sarah is the CEO. If I ask you a question like this, did Kim run quickly? There are actually, again, two things that are expressed in this sentence. So one is a question. So what's the question? It's not a trick question, huh? Who dares answering? Exactly, good. The speed of the runner, right? So maybe there are some linguists in the room, right? The question is about how quickly she ran, but I'm affirming that she did run, okay? So again, the fact that Kim ran is a commitment here. The question is only on how quickly she did it. And so then the kind of things that we're going to focus on now for the rest of the talk is something like this. If I say, if anyone discovers that the method is also one bad proof, they will want to scoop me. I'm committed to the complement of the verb here. So I'm affirming that the method is also one bad proof. So you're still all with me? Even though it's under this conditional, okay? And so all of those are, commitment of the speaker. And this is something in regular conversation, now at the coffee talk, listen to what you are saying, and you will realize that this is the kind of thing that you infer all the time, every minute. Okay? So what we are going to focus on is speaker commitment to content of the clausal complement. In some cases, they are, then, the content of the complement is taken as a commitment of the speaker, but not always, right? And this is something that linguists have, spent a lot of ink on, trying to find, what are exactly the factors that lead to commitment or to no commitment, okay? And we don't have a definite answer yet, but trying to get a better grasp on this phenomenon. So if I ask you this, at the heart of the universe, there is cruelty. We are predator, and I prey upon every living thing. Did you know that wasps lay their eggs in ladybirds, piercing the weak spot in their armor? Am I affirming that wasps lay their eggs in ladybirds, piercing the weak spot in their armor? Yeah, so some people say yes. I see a lot of shaking, yeah. But so the question here is, we'll each time take the complement that I underline, and we are wondering whether it's a commitment of the speaker. Yes, we don't know, or maybe importantly, the speaker is committed to the negation of it, right? And so you should actually, for opinion mining, information extraction, extract the negation of the event. Yeah? I guess this is that symbol. Okay? So those are real examples. Yeah? And so the question was like, what's the source of speaker commitment to the content of clausal complement? So if I say something like this, does Judith know that Marie is in Turku? Do you take the speaker to affirm that Marie is in Turku? Okay? So some people have said that the only thing that matters is the kind of verb that you have above this complement, right? And a verb like no is often presupposing the content of the complement, so you take the complement to be a fact, to be true. So we call those factive verbs, okay? In contrast to me asking, or someone, sorry, not me asking, does Judith believe that Marie is in Turku? But you can believe false things and true things, and so here people would not take the speaker to be committed to Marie being in Turku, okay? And we call those non-factive verbs. But then there is a whole lot of research going on, saying like it's not only the lexical semantics of the verb that is mattering, but the context, right? And we all know that language is pretty complex, right? And so maybe context can do a lot on top of the lexical semantics of those verbs. So here, that was the on top. You have the example that I showed you before, and you don't dare saying it out loud, but I was seeing a lot of people nodding, saying like, yeah, the speaker is committed to wasps laying their eggs in ladybird. But if I ask something like this in the second example, rather a long shot, wasn't it? 20 years? How do you know the baby was born here? Is the speaker committed to the baby being born there? No. Most of you are shaking their head. We don't know, right? Even though both under a question and under no, right? And so context is doing a lot here too. And so with linguist colleague Mandy Simons at CMU and my colleague Judith Anhauser at OSU, I built what we call the commitment bank to try to investigate what are the factors that lead to speaker commitment of content of clausal complements. So this is a very peculiar data set where all the sentences have one form, okay? So they are all going to have some context that I didn't put here, but imagine they are like at up to 2 sentences, so limited context above the sentence on the screen. And every time what we are asking about is the content of the complement. So here in blue, there is still a chance. And so that's when we asked participants to judge, we were asking them, is the author certain that there is still a chance? Okay? So they are all embedded under verb, okay, close embedding verb, and under what we call an entailment cancelling operator, a question, negation, conditional, or a modal. Okay? So if I say, Marie is in Turku, blankly, affirming Marie is in Turku. If I say Marie is not in Turku, you cancel the event, right? So negation is what we call canceling. And then again, we ask judgment on mechanical turf. And so this is how the experiment was set up. They would see a context uttered by, someone, here, Sally, and then you would be asked, tell us how certain Sally is that Christmas shopping was stressful. They didn't have the little emoticon, of course, right? And they had to decide whether Sally is certain that it is true, uncertain whether it's true or false, or certain that it is false. Okay? Does that make sense? Note that actually, linguists, which is something I never fully understood, but maybe this is why I'm a computational linguist, they actually really don't care whether you are asserting the negation of the event. Okay? So they look at, is this commitment or not commitment? Okay? But I think from an NLP perspective, we really do care about identifying this, right? If you are asserting the negation of the event, that's pretty important for us. We had, at least 8 Turkers judging this. We made sure they were paying attention to the task by having each time some control items where clearly it's a contradiction or clearly it is an affirmation. And if they didn't reply well to those 2 items, we would pay them, but they were kicked out. Okay, for the data. Okay, and so this for the rest of the talk we are going to use those numbers. So +3 will be true, -3 will be not true, and 0 will be uncommitted. Okay, and so we had it's a small data set in terms of NLP, big for linguists. It's 1,200 items. Okay? So here, we just wanted to see whether there was something in this distinction between what we call factive verb, like the no verb, or the non-factive verb, like the believe verb. And so I just plotted the data looking at all the items for the different verbs and see where they fall in terms of speaker commitment. So we have the mean of speaker commitment on the y-axis and lumping all together all items, right? So just a crude analysis here. And in orange, I put the supposedly factive verb. And you see that they are more on the right? So they tend to lead to speaker commitment, which is what we should expect if we believe that lexical semantics is driving this. But you have like other verbs like see, find, or if you look at it, it's not always super committed. Okay? So there is gradient in this notion of speaker commitment. But so with this data set, we were thinking, okay, now we can use those challenging examples. They are not that easy. For humans, we always, get them relatively correct. But what about machines, right? And there's been work of having classifiers out there that do exactly this, right? They call it factivity, or factuality, but it's actually what they are doing is speaker commitment, right? And so, building on all these recent trends where we are like, okay, let's try to evaluate the classifier that we have. So this was like an article on vision, right? So we all know that neural nets did, this tremendous boost for vision, but there was this paper where if you show a living room setting, and then you overlay a picture of an elephant on top of it, the system totally fails, cannot identify the couch anymore, cannot identify the laptop, the woman sitting, the cup, all this goes totally wrong, where, a 3-year-old would say, immediately looking at the picture, why is there an elephant in the living room? But this is something the system cannot see, right? And so this paper was saying, like, we need to have now those data sets that challenge the system that we are building to make sure that those systems are really robust to the phenomenon they are looking at. And so this is what I did with one of my students, Nan Jiang, in evaluating state-of-the-art models of speaker commitment or, factuality. And so we evaluated 2 systems. The first one was the rule-based truth teller, and I put rule-based in quotes because it's basically based on rule-based, but then there was an SVM classifier on top of it to try to learn a little bit more gradients in there. So work by Stanovsky et al. And so how does it work, that system? So it's based on what we call implicative signatures of verb, coming from Cartunen again. So if I say, Kim, remember to make reservation, if you remember something, the something is true, right, happened. So here, so if I have Kim remember to make the reservation, the question is, did Kim made or didn't make the reservation? Yeah? And if I say, Kim, remember to make the reservation, you are going to say, yes, she did. Yeah? Okay? All of this because of the semantics of remember. Now, if I say, Kim failed to remember to make the reservation, did she make the reservation? You know, we'll say like, no, okay. And how do you get to this? By kind of going down this dependency tree, and this is what the system was doing, Stanovsky's system is doing, is that you know that if you fail to do something, you have to reverse the factuality of that verb, right? So remember, you did do it, but if you fail, then you didn't. Okay, does that make sense? So the system is going through, it has those rules for the semantics of the verb based on what we call implicative signatures coming from Cartunen, and it's going down the dependency tree and recursively applying the signatures of the verb. Then they actually took, different features coming from this rule-based system and applied an SVM on top of it. So that's the Stanovsky system, the rule-based truth-teller. And then we also evaluated by LSTM models coming from Rödinger et al. So she had 3 typologies: linear, where she just took, the sentence linearly; 3, where she looked at the dependency tree, top-down, bottom-up; and then a hybrid model that's combining the two, trained on 4 speaker commitment data sets that exist out there, exactly with the same annotation that the one I built, the commitment bank. So -3 to +3. So one of the things to note is that most of this data is actually newswire data, okay? So that's going to actually be a little bit of a problem for the models, right? So the "it happened" is actually the English web corpus annotated for speaker commitment. And again, so what they did here is they actually took only 2 annotations, took the average. So I'm not sure that's the best thing to do, but that's what we have. Okay? So now we have this rule-based model, those by LSTM models that do speaker commitment. And we are going to evaluate them on this challenging data set, the commitment bank. So fair enough, right? This is a hard test to put them through, right? Because they have not been built to look at this, commitment of complement, right? But if we want robust natural language processing, we should be able to do those inferences also. Okay. So one little caveat is then, when looking at the data, I realized that for some items, everybody was agreeing. So like this one here, this is the one that I showed you before with the wasp. And on the left side, you have like the scale, 3 to -3. And then I just put, how many people said what, right? And you see that on the first one, everybody said yes, commitment, like, all of you in this room. For the baby one, most of them, here I had 10 Turkers and 7 said uncommitted, okay? But we had other items coming from fiction, actually, where you can see the annotation was all over the place, right? And this item is actually pretty intriguing. I can really be alive. It can really be alive. It's not really about to bite me. Dorcas would not have brought me in here if he knew there was a monster about to bite me. And you see that, is there a monster about to bite the speaker? People went all over the place. And I think that's possible, right? Either you play the game and you are in the book and, yeah, maybe then there is a monster, or you're like, this is fiction anyway. monsters do not exist, so I'm saying no. I'm not totally sure what's going on here, but items like this, where humans disagree, I don't think that's fair to ask machine to do it right? So we removed all those items where there was a lot of variability among the judgment. So we ended up with a small data set, around 600 items. That's the one we are testing our system on. And for all of the items, people were highly agreeing with one another. Okay? So as previous work, what I'm reporting here is Pearson R correlation, and then mean absolute error. Okay? So mean absolute error is really looking at an absolute fit, and I'm really saying -2, -1, +3. Whereas correlation is more looking at the direction of the answer. And so no big surprise here. Performance is not great overall, right? We have huge error bar. The most right one here is a stupid baseline of always saying -2, which was kind of the most common answer. And you see that the system are not doing really a lot more. So on the left side, each time it's the rule-based system. Then we have the tree by LSTM model. Okay, and so this kind of baseline. But you see poor correlation, the best one is this rule-based with half and huge error bar. And so then for the rest, I only looked at the best system, which was the rule-based, and then this hybrid by LSTM. Okay? So if you actually look at what the system are doing, they're not doing a lot. Okay, so no big surprise. But the rule-based system is kind of always at the extreme because it's based on those rules, right? Either highly commitment or no commitment, right? I'm too short at the top, right, or at the bottom. Yeah, so it's always kind of categorical. And so the SVM lets you do some little thing, right? But if you look at what the hybrid model is doing, so this is 0, you see that it's almost always saying something positive, right? If the system were correct, because I'm plotting here the gold on the x-axis, prediction on the y-axis, it should be on the diagonal, right? But it's not. And you see that the hybrid system is actually really can't predict any non-commitment. Negation of the complement. Okay? So what I was plotting here, the little orange and the circle and the crosses, was this distinction between factive and non-factive verb. We wanted to see, are the system doing better on some than others? And here you see that actually the rule-based system does slightly better on non-factive verb. So not surprising, right? Because it really kind of predicts always that a factive verb is going to lead to speaker commitment, and it has no way of taking context into account. Okay? And then you see here, so the hybrid system does slightly better here because it captures some of the difference, -2, -1, and so this is why, the error bars are always going to be slightly better here for the hybrid system, given that this rule-based system is always just categorical, yes or no. Then we wanted to see, do those systems do slightly better on negation? When you have the embedders, that's a negation, since we've been spending a lot of time on trying to get, negation right. And sure, the rule-based system does it slightly better when there is a negation. So instead of a question, so it would say like, Judith doesn't know that Marie is in Turku, rather than does Judith know that Marie is in Turku? But frankly, this is slightly bad, right? And by LSTM model, they don't learn anything about those embedders on the data that they are trained on, right? And then also, very importantly, no model can handle what we call neg raising. So if I say, I don't think that's a great idea, do I believe it's a great idea? no, right? So politely, let's say Joachim would say something like this. I would maybe not say to Joachim, no, that's a bad idea, but I would say politely, Joachim, I don't think that's a great idea. And Joachim would immediately understand, Marie does not think it's a good idea, right? But so again, super important, right? And think, I don't know what's the politeness usually in the Scandinavian country. I don't know if you're rather direct or you do hedging like this, okay? But for machine to understand this, that's pretty crucial, right? Again, think about opinion. You would want to get this right? And the system really, really can not do it at all, right? You see the correlation is just like really bad and huge error bar. So to be, slightly again fairer to the system, we were thinking, okay, maybe asking them to do these huge gradients from -3 to +3 is a bit too much. Okay, so let's see whether they can already do a 3-way classification. Okay, so let's pull the data and say, can you say commitment, I don't know, or false, right? I'm committed to not the complement. Okay? And then also, this is slightly more interpretable probably for us because then we can compute just an F1. Okay? And so here we have for commitment, you see that the rule base is actually in the 70 F1. Also can do quite well for non-commitment to no, but totally impossible to realize no, not commitment, I don't know, right? It's actually 0. The BILSTM are just really bad, okay? Do nothing. But again, because of the data they are trained on, right? But I think this is something we need to realize, right? Especially if we have outside NLP people who are using those systems as black boxes, they need to fully understand the kind of data that those systems are trained on, right? So this is newswire data, probably with, heavy bias towards, commitment, and they cannot do the whole lot of construction that we actually have in data, right? If you want to then, deploy this for dialogue, it's going to fail big time, right? With the neck raising that we just saw, incapable of doing this, right? So future work, and I will end with this, maybe we've seen, that if you actually inject a little bit of the data that interests you, capturing the phenomenon that you want to look at, some of the Muppets do really well, right? So that's the next thing is like, can we actually put a little bit of the data into BERT and then help BERT to do greatly, right? And I'm thinking it will, right? And so that's good news, right? If we can sit down, annotate even maybe 200 examples, that's not a big deal, right? Especially with Mechanical Turk. And then we have a system that now becomes robust. That's good news. And then we could revisit also the work that we did before. Instead of having just this log linear model, maybe we could train one of the, neural nets and do again better. Okay. So to wrap up, hopefully, I convinced you that linguistically motivated features conjoined with surface level ones are necessary to enable an NLP application, and that speaker commitment is something that's pretty complex. And right now we don't have a good handle on it, but so that means that we still have a job for the future years. And hopefully I convince you that doing this right is necessary for opinion mining and information extraction. So thank you, and I think we see Kiitos finish. And of course, this is not possible without my students that I acknowledge along the line, and research assistant, as well as money from the National Science Foundation. So thank you very much.
So thank you, Marie, for a wonderful talk. So we have time for questions and comments. I'll try to run up.
Thank you. Thank you for a very interesting talk. I wonder if we could see the example with the ladybird.
With the ladybird?
Yeah. The one with the evil world.
Yeah. This one?
Yes, yes. So I have a feeling that if you ask the author here, he would say that the commitment is that the universe is cruel.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. And so well, sometimes you just say a thing like that, so the world is cruel, and people don't know if you're committed or not, and then you go on for a while, and then you become sure. So the main issue here is the cruelty of the universe, but you only discover this when you see that the argumentation goes on. So my question would be to you: you could call this rhetorical structure or something like that. Do you think we will ever have a chance to sort of exploit the rhetorical structure of connected text like this?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I think it's pretty complex, right? So I don't think we released all of the data yet, but so we wanted to do something like what you just asked, with my linguist cap on, and so what we also have as annotation is only the sentence. So if you don't see the context, does that change the annotation? And then what we also did is if you only see the context and then you are asked the complement, but so sometimes it's pretty weird, right? So here you would see at the heart of the universe there is cruelty. We are predators and I prey upon every living thing. Is the author committed to ask blah, blah, blah? What do we do, right? Because so sometimes just the context is enough to tell you what's the commitment for the complement, or sometimes the complement itself is word knowledge, right? One example in the data was like, who is stupid enough to blur their credit card number to any stranger calling them, right? And no matter what the context is, people are going to say like, no one is committed to, this being a good thing, right? So, so maybe there is data to help looking at that, but that's a really good question. Thank you.
More questions?
Yes. So this is a throwable microphone. Catch.
Wow.
Hello? Yeah, okay. So, yeah, wow. Thanks for a great talk. This is really inspiring. I was curious, so you mentioned several places how negation influences speaker commitment, right? Yeah. And negation is kind of complex phenomenon. It can be expressed in many ways. So you mentioned these negative verbs, fail and negracing and blah, blah. Yeah, so I was just curious, do you, in your systems, explicitly model negation in some way, or is it, do you have any thoughts on how that can sort of be incorporated into these systems? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so part of my dissertation was on finding contradiction, right? So I did look a lot at, the ways contradiction is, coming. So in the first system, the one with the tweet, right? We had only just looking at is there negation on the keyword, yeah. And negation could be some kind of negative verb, just direct negation, stuff that I had done in my dissertation, right, without or stuff like that. Nothing really, really difficult. In the system that we evaluated, they also look a little bit at what negation is doing through those implicative signature of the verb for the rule-based system. And then by LSTM, there is nothing inherently surfacey done, right? But it's hoping to learn what negation is doing through the by LSTM, but clearly it's not, right? But maybe because there are not that many negation in the data, there actually is some negation, but maybe not enough to learn what negation is really doing. But that's where maybe there's been, work showing that if you tag, some kind of feature to the embeddings, you can do better in those LSTM model. And so probably that's the avenue to look at. But I haven't done it yet.
No. All right, thanks. Who wants?
We have time for one more. Yeah. Well,
Really?
I think Jörg was a fraction of a second. But if it's not too long, I think we can take both questions. Yeah.
Does it work? Yeah. Okay. I always think about parallel data. That's always what I do. And so I had the question whether you think it would be useful to look at multiple data, parallel data, to find out the different level of politeness. You mentioned already that in some languages, some things are expressed in a more polite way, and others it's more direct. Could the system learn from that signal and say, okay, here you have a very explicit no. Someone say this is not a good idea, and then in some other languages you have a very polite way of saying no.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. Yeah, I would love being able to do that. But I haven't done it, but sure, yeah.
Okay, Lars, can we?
At least it doesn't hurt.
I'm wondering, some of us would like to make a distinction between affirming and presupposing. And in the example you keep from quickly, I think many of us would like to say that the speaker is not affirming in German, but presupposing.
Yes.
So my question is, does that make any difference when judging speaker commitment or not?
Good. Yeah. So I should have used the term presupposition, right? But no, I don't think it makes a difference, right? I mean, depending on what you want to take. But if you take the, Stornacker definition of speaker commitment, it's really, using the notion of presupposition. And especially, going towards, real application, I think that distinction can be not really drawn totally finely, right? The thing is that you want to know whether, can I make this part of my common ground, right? However it's coming into my common ground, right? And this is what we want to know. So.
Would you say that is true also for dialogue? Because the next speaker reaction is probably different to a sort of misconceived position on the next speaker.
True. But, I mean, the thing is that, so if suddenly you have this presupposition, right, that you need to accommodate, you wonder, how is it coming into the common ground, right? Do I have to repair that, I wasn't aware of that presupposition and now I have to, but ultimately, right, to kind of continue, you have to just know whether you should put it in your common ground or not, right? It's true that maybe some kind of reaction might be different, whether it's coming from just an affirmation or accommodation of presupposition, and you might be able to, do slightly better if we make this distinction, but maybe that's going to be the next step, right? If already we could, be sure of what's happening, what do we all, both take for granted? I think that would already be much better for the dialogue system. And it might be coming from then, generation, right, of language, right? And it might be more natural if you know where it's coming from. Does this make sense?
Okay, thank you. I think we'll have to stop here, although I'm sure there's still many questions, but Marie will be around. So there will now be a coffee break, and the parallel sessions will start at 10:35, according to the schedule. But first of all, let's thank Marie again for a truly amazing keynote.